Okay, we made it to 2 people. That's enough to get started. I imagine there might be a couple more people coming in late. Okay, so while you're getting set up, since we're kind of limited on our time regarding the, because this is the hybrid class. Okay, let me just make sure it's streaming, it's picking up the volume, everything looks good. Okay. So for anybody in the online class who's watching this, give me, send me an email if you want to attend a live lecture, because there's probably room. There's only so many students allowed in the classroom, but a lot of the live section students are watching from home, so we might be able to make accommodations if you're on the online section and you want to show up to class. I'd imagine everyone's able to access the recorded lectures or the streaming lectures. And then assignment number 1 is posted. So today's lecture is going to coincide with assignment number 1. To view that, go to assignments. To view the details of it, you actually click the assignment, and then it tells you the due date. Normally what I do in my courses is I'll try to align it with the class day, but I realize there's a lot of people watching from home, so what I did is I'm just going to when possible, I'm going to try to make the assignments due at the end of the week, so Friday. So normally I would have made it due the 8th, but I give you a few extra days in case anybody's watching from home. 10 points. So remember the point system. This is going to be out of a total of 100 points. So what this means is that this is worth 10% of your overall grade. And there's various parts to it, but that'll make sense a little bit later, and I'll go through how to turn that in. Okay, so everyone's good with that? Any questions here? Okay. So let's go ahead and get started. Are you set up that we can, everyone's good? Okay. So let's go ahead and make a new folder for today. So I'm going to go into the CGS4828 folder. And I think I don't think I posted last week's examples. We didn't do that many anyway. It was mostly review, but I'll make sure to get that posted. But let's go ahead and make a new folder for today. Today is the 1st. Let's open up brackets. And for most people, it's probably still pointing to last week's files. If I click, went through that a little fast. If I click, some of you may say getting started or point to another folder, but essentially this button in the upper left-hand corner should allow you to open a folder. And then I'm going to go into CGS4828, today's date. And the whole purpose of that is just, now every time we create a file, it automatically defaults into there. I've just seen far too many people lose files and have things scattered throughout flash drives and so on. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started with an example here. And under links, so you don't have to retype this same code over and over and over again. If you click the first link, HTML boilerplate code, you'll see some code here. It has some options. We'll use some of these later on in the semester, but I'm just going to copy and paste just as is here. And we notice that it doesn't have syntax highlighting yet, so what we have to do is actually save it as an HTML file. So I'm going to go, notice that it defaulted here to our folder, and I'll just call this ex1.html. I don't think I have a link to it, but the other thing that we're going to use a lot is Lorem Ipsum, so I'm just going to search for that. just have that available in another tab here so I can get to it when I need to. There's a bunch of these different generators. Some have a theme, like I saw someone had a Lorem Ipsum with movie quotes, and just all kinds of other stuff. So there's a lot of themes, but this is just kind of the plain version of this. So we're going to use this, and we're going to use HTML shell a lot. So right now you should have your ex1.html set up. And let's go ahead and just get right into coding. So I'm sort of assuming at this point everyone knows what an HTML tag is. This is probably your third course in this, so I'm not going to go over very, very basic stuff. But let's explore kind of an interesting tag here called the article tag. So there are two similar tags. There's one called article, and there's one called section. We're not going to really talk about section too much. Section is very generic. Article has a little bit more what's called semantic information. And the idea is it's just less generic. It has, you're basically saying what it is. It's an article. And there's a bunch of different ways we can use this. And this link has a bunch of like the theory and detail on it, but for the most part, I think all you care about is actually using it. And so we can see a typical usage here is going to be to have the article, and then that article can have a header. It cannot have a header. You know, it's up to you. It's not like a lot of this is just very loosely structured. It's just like best practice. It's if you think it deserves a header, put a header in. If you don't think it needs a header, you don't have to. It doesn't even have to necessarily be structured like this. You could have a header and paragraphs. There's a bunch of different ways you could do this. So you can see the basic structure here. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's put an article in. And then we're going to have a header. By the way, just a quick detail. I think most of you probably already have this, but there's an extension here. Notice, and I try not to go out of order when possible, but under Extension Manager, there's a useful extension called Beautify. So if you go to Available, you can go ahead. I know that's a little difficult to see here. Let's see if we can make it a little bit larger. So if you go to Available and start typing in the word Beautify, it's this one right here. You can see it's already installed, so I'm just going to leave it as is. But one of the nice things that it does is notice how this is correctly indented. So every time, we'll get into this a little bit later, but every time you open up an HTML tag, you want to indent one level, usually with the tab key. And notice that it did that automatically. One of the things that I do is after I have it installed, you'll notice that there's a check mark right here that says Beautify on save. That's really useful. So that if you've got a, and the whole purpose for this Beautify and indenting and all that is it makes your code a lot easier to read. Okay, so just as a quick thing that should be helpful. I would suggest most people install that. I think it's pretty useful. Okay, so we've got an article, we've got our header. Let's put an H1 in here. And let's pretend like we've got some sort of announcements page. We're just making a bunch of announcements. Let's say spring registration is open. And then put a paragraph. And what I'm going to do is I'm not going to, because the font sizes are so large, I'm just going to do a couple of sentences here. I'm going to do too much. Actually, let's not do Lorem Ipsum there. That's probably a bad usage. So what you typically have inside of this header, inside of an article, would be like the title of the article, and then maybe published 9/1/2020, something like that. That'd be a more typical usage of it. I don't want to just always dump in Lorem Ipsum. So following this general guideline of their structure, that's what they did, they had published on. There's a time tag, I'm not gonna get too detailed. And then from there we can start putting paragraphs directly in there. And so that's where we'd start to put, let's maybe do 2 Lorem Ipsum paragraphs. And I know I'm going a little fast. What I'll do is every once in a while I'll just pause just to make sure everyone's caught up and review. It's just a little bit shorter so we can have some screen. So we've got our article tag, and that just means that we've got some sort of article. We've got our header, and I think for most people the idea of a header should be pretty obvious. And then inside that header of the article we've got the H1, which is sort of serving as the title of the article. This paragraph saying when we published it. Now again, we could get more detailed, we could use the time tag, but I don't really want to get into that right now. Okay, and remember that we always match them. And notice, as I was mentioning before, just some stylistic things, is that every time we open a tag, we indent one level, and the idea is that makes more readable. So notice that I have body is open here, I indent a level, I opened up article, I opened up header. But now notice these two are lined up the same. It's because every time I close a tag, I go back one over. So this and this, this and this, and as soon as I close the header, notice that I go back over one. I go back over one. As soon as I close the article, I go back over one. Same thing with body. Okay, and you don't even have to honestly think about it too much if you have that Beautify plugin available. Now, this is a single article. We could have maybe 5 or 6 articles. Let's say, for example, we've got an announcements page. Now what I could do is I could put an H1 up here and just say announcements. But to me that's almost like the header of the page. So we've got an article header, but we also might have a page header. So let's go ahead and put it on the top of our page, and it'll just say announcements. Now it gets a little bit difficult to do these examples, so I'm not going to do 5 articles, but you very well could do 5 articles. We'll just stick to the one just so you get an example of the structure. Now it's pretty common to organize your code into, like, for most pages anyway, something like a header, title of the page saying where you are, what the page is doing, an article, or let me take a step back. So the header, then an area called main, and a footer. Now footer, let's just knock that out. That should be pretty straightforward. The typical thing you might put in a footer is just something basic like copyright 2020. So we've got our header, which is kind of like serving as the page title. One article, but mentally think that you've got a bunch of articles on your page, and a footer. Now, to kind of group all these articles together into the main content of your page, into the kind of like what the page is all about, header and footer are just like extra stuff. It's kind of giving additional information. But the main part of your page is all these different articles. And again, article is very generic. It could actually be a news article, it could be a blog posting. It's just kind of some contained piece of information. What's very common to do is to surround that inside of a tag called main. So let's go ahead and do that. So notice that it automatically closed. So what I have to do is I have to cut and paste this down here. And as soon as I save, because I have that Beautify plugin, it handles all of this for me. So we've got inside of main, we wouldn't have 5 mains. We'd have 1 main, 5 articles, and each of those articles would follow this general structure. And even within an article, if you really wanted to, you could even add one more footer that says let's not do that. I don't want it to get too much. But you could add a footer in there that is like a, maybe a link to a page, or like click for comments, that type of thing. But let's keep our lives simple. That's good enough. So we've got our main article. We've got a header. It's kind of like the title and other information about our individual article. Multiple paragraphs. And then if we had another article, what we would do is within main, we would put that here. We're not going to do that just for, just kind of makes it that there's too much on one page for examples, but in the real world, you'd typically have multiple articles. Okay, so that's the article tag. Any questions on that? Everyone's good? Pretty straightforward. Anybody need me to leave this up for a second so you can get the code? Okay. So let's do another example here. Let's go into tables. So we'll start off copying and pasting. So in brackets I did file new. That gave me a blank file here. Notice that's called Untitled. And then when I go to save, and I call it ex2.html, the .html part's very important. Notice that I get the syntax highlighting and all that stuff here. Now I don't know if I have a specific link on tables, but you can always just go to W3 Schools. Under HTML, they have a whole section on tables. Okay, but this should be review. I think in most CGS1821 classes they cover tables. So the idea of a table is that it holds table data. The technical term is, I think they call it tabular data. The reason I even say that is because there was a time when we had really limited layout techniques in HTML, and what people would do is they would put their entire page in one giant table. And table was really never meant for that. If you remember the creator of the web, Tim Berners-Lee, he was a scientist. So when, you know, it's impossible to know what somebody was thinking at the time, but if you're writing a research paper, you're going to typically have tables in there. And what do you put in that table, in those tables? Typically data. Like for example, if you're a biologist and you're running an experiment with mice, you might have each row as the experiment number, and then each column have some data about that experiment, like you know, how long the mice, that individual mouse did whatever. So think about it for data. So try not to use it for layout. I shouldn't say try not to. Don't use it for layout. There's really no need anymore. There was a time, but now we have that it was really difficult to not use it. But we have much more sophisticated techniques now. We have something called Flexbox. We have Grid, so we can use those. So let's do a quick example table. So to create a table, we just put table. Now, with some other HTML tags, the ordering and the structure and stuff, it's very loose. Like we can put a header in, we can not put a header in, we can put a paragraph or not. Table is very specific. Table requires a very certain structure. That's why I go over it. Same thing with lists, which we'll go over next. And so a table, we create a table, and then what we do is we have a TR, which stands for table row. And then within that row, we're either going to have TH for the table header. So that's the first row that says what it is. It'll make sense in a second. And then we have TD for table data. Let's start off creating a row here. And let's say, for example, we're just doing something simple, like you're running laps or swimming laps or something like that. So what we'll do is the first column will be the lap number. And then, let's see if we have Alice and Bob. Now there's a bunch of different ways to structure it. This is just an example table. And I guess we really should have previewed example 1. I was trying to get through it so quick because of time purposes. And to be honest, there's not a whole lot to view on example 1 anyway. This one, it'll make a little bit more sense to view it, so let's go ahead and view this. So we've got our lap number, Alice and Bob. Now we can do some stuff with CSS, but let's keep it simple for now. Let's just say that border is equal to 1. Normally we would put CSS here, but we haven't really talked too much about CSS, so let's just keep it simple. Let's just go ahead and give it a border. Oops, so I have to actually spell it correctly, B-O-R-D-E-R. Okay, now we have a border. So that's our first row with our table heading, but it's not really going to make sense unless we have actual data. So let's say, by the way, it's good I mistyped that. Even though we can type uppercase names, modern style for HTML is just to do everything lowercase. Okay. And say, so the, I have to think of this in my head. So this is going to line up to the lap number. So this is going to be lap number 1. And this will be Alice's lap number 1. So let's say 38, whatever seconds, doesn't really matter the data. So let's just kind of fill this out. So this will be Bob's. And then one more row just so we can kind of see the structure here. And so this will be lap number 2. This will be Alice's lap number 2. She's going a little bit faster. And we'll say Bob did the same as lap number 1. Okay, so you get the basic structure. Now in practice, tables aren't important. The tables are somewhat important, but it's not like you're going to use them on every single page. You know, it's going to be when you specifically have this type of information, what's called tabular data. You're not going to use it for layouts like it once was. You really want to, for example, if you have a class schedule, that'd be a good example of when to put data into a table. In this case, experiments. Maybe if you have a like an order that you're creating, it could be like the item, quantity, cost, that sort of stuff, and say there's like 20 different items that you're ordering. That'd probably be a good example of when to put stuff into a table. Doing page layouts, it's not a good example because hopefully you can see you could actually put your entire page inside of a table, and then the first row might be the heading or the kind of like the top of your page, what we just did with the header. And then you could have a second row, and you could split that into 3 columns by doing 3 TDs, but don't do that. We're going to learn better techniques later using grid. Okay, so this should be fairly straightforward. Any questions on this? I can leave this up for a little bit longer in case anybody needs to copy it. Okay, so let's file new. Example 3. In this example, what we'll do is lists. I know it's kind of tough to hear me through the mask. So L-I-S-T, list. So there are 2 types of lists, and we can see this in W3 schools. So not links, we want lists. We have unordered and ordered. A good example of an unordered list would be a shopping list, because it doesn't really matter the order of the items. You might decide to shop alphabetically. Most people probably just go up and down the aisle, and as they see stuff, they get it, and maybe they didn't see something the first time through and they have to go back. And so that's unordered, because it doesn't really matter the order, just as long as when you leave the store you have all the items on the shopping list. An ordered list, the order does matter. So for example, a recipe. For example, you can't put the item in the oven and then mix the ingredients. It's like everything has to happen in a specific order. Or for example, changing a bike tire, I can't remove the tube from that tire until I've taken the tire off. Okay? So those are examples, and usually it's like directions, but I'm sure you could come up with other examples when you might want to order into your list. Okay, so let's do a couple examples of those. So let's do UL first, unordered list. And just like table, the reason I go over table and lists specifically is because they do have a structure to them. It's not like, again, with our paragraphs and articles where I can just kind of use them in any, I shouldn't say paragraphs, let's go back to article. Article, I can omit the header, I can keep the header if I want, I can put paragraphs directly in it, I can put paragraphs inside of a footer if I wanted to. But with lists, it's a very, and tables as well, as you saw before, it's a very specific structure, is that we wrap the whole thing in either a UL or an OL for order list. And then from there we have individual list items, and we note those as LI. So let's say, for example, this is a shopping list. We want to buy some bread. Eggs. Salad. So here we're just sort of listing items that we need. And then an ordered list, the ordering does matter. So let's say, for example, we'll keep it simple. Let's say we're just toasting bread. So we might place bread in toaster. Pressed toast button. I don't know, wait for toast. We'll pretend it gives you some sort of bell. Even though I've never seen a toaster do that. You just kind of wait for it to pop. So what's the main difference between the two? You'll notice that visually we get the cue that, okay, with an unordered list, it just gave us bullet points. With an ordered list, because there is an ordering to it, it said 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, the thing that you got to be careful about is not to get too caught up into the styling of things. Because HTML by itself is just to describe the information. So here I'm saying that it's an unordered list. With the ordered list, same thing, but yes, it's given me some visual cues, some sort of what we call stylistic information, but really we should rely on CSS for that. We're going to talk about CSS at the end of class today, but note that we could change all this. Now, HTML does have default styling because remember, CSS hasn't been around forever. So first HTML was created, and then later on we had CSS. And so by default, HTML does have some styling associated with it, and it tends to be reasonable defaults. Like an H1 is slightly larger than, say, just paragraph text. But for the most part, we tend to change that. And there's actually what are called reset scripts, where it gets rid of all that default styling. So if we wanted to, we could, instead of bullets here, we could say style is equal to list style type, and we see our options here. Now, if we really wanted to, we could actually set it to none and have no styling, which is something actually we'll see later in class today. And notice that it doesn't actually have any styling. But let's just change it to something else for now. Let's say the style type is I guess the closest we could get is square, even though it's probably not going to show up very well, the difference between a circle and a square, but yeah, you can kind of see it. Same thing here with an ordered list. Say we wanted to do Roman numerals. Okay, so again, we get some defaults, but I wouldn't rely too much on HTML default styling, because to be perfectly honest, when I do stuff, I tend to use what are called reset scripts, and it just kind of gives you a blank slate. And then from there you get to, because oftentimes you change it and it's like, it makes the code almost more difficult to read because you're constantly resetting stuff in the code to something else. So I like to just start with a blank slate and just have it reset everything. We'll get into this in a little bit, but for example, like if we set this list style type to none, it's going to have some, I think it's margin associated with it, and we have to clear out the margin. But you get the idea, is that all these can be overridden with CSS. Okay. Any question about lists? So the takeaway with lists is we have unordered lists and ordered lists, and then for each individual thing in the list, we have list items. And if you want to keep like examples in your head, a good example for an unordered list would be a shopping list, and an ordered list would be like recipe directions. Now, what we'll see later is that we can use lists for other things, such as navigation, because your site's navigation actually might be a list of links. So we can use that as well. We'll see that in a later example. Okay. Okay, so let's start new. So I want to show you hyperlinks, and to do that correctly, we can't really just use brackets. So let's do this. What I want to do is go inside of our folder for today. So I'm going to go into our September 1st folder, and then I'm going to make a folder called links, because we're going to talk about hyperlinks. And then notice that it shows up here. It's very tiny. But what we can do is, so now if we go to File, New, and we copy and paste in here. Now instead of saving directly in this 9/1/2020 folder, what we want to do is go into links. And then rather than calling it ex1.html, because I want to show you a very specific structure, we're going to call it index.html. So let me go through that whole process one more time in case anybody didn't see it. We go into today's folder, and then I'm going to, and I realize in Mac it's a little bit different, but you should know how to make folders in Mac. I'm going to go ahead and create a folder, and I'm just going to call it links. Then file new, paste in our HTML boilerplate code. Then I want to go to File, Save, or I always just use Control S. And then go inside links, and we want to save it as index.html. And I'll keep these examples kind of small because it's more about the structure than it is about the code. So let's say, for example, this is our home page. And so what we're going to do is we're going to create a small little website. It's not going to have any actual information. But the idea is that you're just going to create a few pages just about yourself. So we're going to have a page about hobbies, and then we're going to have some pages where you describe your various family members. Okay, so notice that if I click here, inside of links, I see index.html, so I know my structure is correct. So let's create a second page. Let's go to File, New. And make sure that when we save it, it's inside of links. Be very careful of this. So we want to, when we save, we want to be inside links. And then we're going to call it hobbies.html. So here I am at the home page. If I open this up in a browser, if I want to send the user, whoever's viewing the page, if I want to send them to the hobbies page, I don't really have a way of doing that. Now, one of the, I don't know what the right word, so links, what are called hyperlinks, were around actually before HTML, but they were kind of popularized by HTML. So most people didn't have experience with them. They definitely existed before HTML, but and the nice thing is that the idea is that I can just go anywhere. So I've got these what we call documents. We would call them web pages, but back then they would call them documents, and then they would have a hyperlink, and I can go anywhere by just setting up the structure to one of these hyperlinks, and then the user clicks the hyperlink, and then it takes them there. So to do that, under our index page, we'll just create a paragraph just so we don't leave it without anything. And the way we do that is we use this tag called A, stands for anchor. Href stands for hyperlink reference. And then we have some double quotes. We'll put some stuff in those double quotes later, and then close the tag. So whatever we put between here, this is what shows up to the user. So in this case, it said home page, going all the way back to example 1. The H1, it would say spring registration. This would say the publication date. Okay, this is all stuff that's shown to the user. When we have something called an HTML attribute, this is giving extra information to the browser. And what this is saying is, this is where, when they click the link, this is where it's going to point to. So let's just very briefly, so we'll just have it say to the user, go to hobbies page. Notice that we get the visual cue that it's a link. It's underlined. Normally it's blue, but then it changes after you click it. And because we've already visited the hobbies page, you can see it's no longer blue. Now if we click it, it's not going to go anywhere because we haven't told it where to go yet. So in the simplest case, when we've got 2 pages in the same folder, so this is the simplest case, we've got index and hobbies are both in the same folder. All we have to do is say href equals, and this is what we call a relative link. I don't go into detail too much because I know that most people in this course are digital media, so I just talk about the simple cases, but there's what's called relative links and absolute links. We're just going to keep life simple. We'll just talk about relative links. So if it's in the same folder, all we have to do is type in the file name. And notice brackets recognizes that, oh, your hobbies.html page is there. By the way, make sure that it's hobbies.html, not hobbies, because the full file name is hobbies.html. Even though the operating system likes to hide file extensions, and I can show you that very quickly in Windows. So if I go to View, by default, these are actually hidden. So it just says hobbies and index. And just because I'm working with file extensions so often, I just tend to show these file name extensions. So all this is doing is hiding it. The actual, even when it's hidden, this is called hobbies.html. The operating system is just hiding it on us. Okay, so we have to make sure to type the full thing. So now, when we click this, it actually takes us to the hobbies page. So what I want you to do is to take, let's say, a minute, and on your own, put a link there that takes you back to home page. So that'll be the text. It'll say back to home page, and then put a link in there that takes you back home. Okay, so that should have been pretty straightforward. We just do A for the anchor tag, even though I think they had other goals and visions for the anchor tag, but pretty much most of the time you're just using it for links. So anytime you see A for anchor, think link. And then href, hyperlink reference, that's where you're pointing it to. And then here we're going to say back to homepage. Now, this is displayed to the user. It's going to say, okay, go back to the home page, but the browser doesn't know where to go. So again, this thing is called an HTML attribute. Anytime you see like a tag and then like a thing, so in this case we have one here called charset, href. We already saw with styling, we can have style equals. And here we're just going to point it back to index.html. So now I should be able to just go back and forth between my pages. So that's the simplest case. Most people can get that. Now, one quick note, I guess I should have brought this up earlier. Get in the habit of just doing everything lowercase. Your tags, your file names, do that all lowercase. The reason being is because Windows and Mac are what's called case insensitive. So had I called this hobbies page hobbies with a capital H, Windows and Mac see that as the same as a lowercase. It's case insensitive. Now, most of the time, you're not just going to leave the page on your computer. What do you want to do? You want to put it somewhere out on a web server. And we'll upload our pages to a web server later in the course. And most web servers tend to be something called Unix or Linux, especially cheap hosting companies. Like if you're, paying like a couple bucks a month or something like that just to host your pages. They tend to be Unix and Linux. Now those are case sensitive. So what that means is had I used a lower and uppercase H, it would have seen those as two different pages. So Mac and Windows would have seen upper and lowercase as just the same page. But on Linux and Unix environments where you're typically going to host, it thinks that those are two different pages. So the reason I'm bringing this up is because a very common thing I'll see is that people will create their web page, or actually their entire website, and they'll have links and they'll point to different pages, and then they go to upload it, and all of a sudden their pages are broken. You go to click the hobbies link, and it says 404 hobbies.html does not exist. Now, one of the most common reasons for that, again, is because sometimes you'll use capitals, sometimes you'll use lowercase. If you just want a blanket where you don't even have to think about it, just a blanket rule, just always use lowercase, because then you don't run into that problem. Now, the other thing, and we'll see this as we go on, is don't use spaces. Because what happens is many times when you use spaces, it makes kind of for what's called like a messy link or messy URL. So what'll happen is, let's say for example, instead of hobbies.html, I had called it my hobbies.html. When somebody goes to that page, what'll happen is these spaces will often turn into, they'll get encoded, and then you'll see that. Has anybody seen those %20s in web pages before? So what I tend to do is, if possible, just keep it short but descriptive still. So don't just have like page 1, page 2, things like that. But if there are cases where it's multiple words, just put a dash in between. Okay, so the dash tends to be the standard. You might see some people use underscores. Avoid that. There's reasons regarding search engines. Search engines don't like underscores. Basically like a decision Google made a long time ago. And yeah, but anyway, so the rule, first rule, just do everything lowercase. It's just going to make your life easier. And then when you're creating your file names, in addition to lowercase, is that if you feel the need to have like a multi-word page name, go ahead and put dashes in between. Don't use spaces. In this case, ours was simple enough that it didn't really make sense to have spaces, so we just had index and hobbies. So this is the simple case. Let's go back to our links folder. And let's create, let's say for example, so I'm going to create a folder called family. Now what you could do is you could dump all of your pages into one folder. So if you had a very large site like say IRSC and you had thousands of pages, you could theoretically put that all in one folder and get very creative with the naming. Most people don't tend to do that. What do? If you have potentially a bunch of pages that are related. So for example, if you have like 10 family members that you'd like to give their own little page, it probably makes sense to group that into a folder called family. So we made a new folder in there inside of links, new folder, family. Now let's go over here and let's do a file new, and then let's copy and paste our HTML shell. Now I'm going to save this. Okay, so inside of links. But now I'm going to put it inside of family. And we'll say mom.html. So this will be a page. We'll just with an h1 called mom. So just to make sure you understand, because right now we're not too concerned about what the content. It's more about the structure. So inside of this links folder, we had our index and hobbies pages. Index is a special name. If we have time, I'll talk about it a little bit. And then if we have a bunch of pages that can be logically grouped together, it's a good idea to put them in a folder because it makes it just, it's just an organizational technique, nothing really further than that. And then so within family, we created our mom.html page. Now, what if we're on our index page and we want to link to that? So I go here and I'd say, okay, href, close this. It's a little bit more complicated, though, because before they were both in the same folder. That's not true anymore. This new page is within a subfolder. So to get to that, what we have to do is, the idea is that, so this is our starting point. We have to kind of give it directions. We say, okay, first go into the family folder and then go to mom.html. So that translates into family mom.html. So it's saying first go into that folder called family and then mom.html. Now one quick note, there is a difference in slashes between this and this. In Windows and other operating systems, they like to use what's called the backslash. When we're doing stuff on the web, across the board we have to use this, what's called the /. This is just the slash chosen for the web. Even if your particular operating system likes to use backslashes, this is what we use for the web. So we do family / and that slash means go into the family folder, and then we need some sort of separator, that's what the slash is, and then go and get the mom.html page. And now if we're on our home page, we click this, notice that it goes to the correct page. So the first case we talked about was when the two links are in the same folder. The next case is when we're trying to go into a subfolder. The next case is what throws a lot of people off. Because let's say, for example, I wanted to have a link here. Go back to home page. I want to stay consistent. What did I call it before? Just back to home page. It's a little bit more difficult to describe because we can't say go into any subfolder. We're already in the subfolder. We have to say, okay, get out of that subfolder, go up one level. So I'm in family. I need to go up into links. I need to get out of that folder, and then from there I can describe it. So the way we do that, to describe going up one level, we do .. So if you're in a folder and you need to go up one level, you need to get out of that folder, we do .. And that means to go up one level, and then from here we see our index.html page. Now one thing, so don't type this, but here's what I'll actually often see, is that people go too far. So what I mean is that you can go up multiple levels. So I go up one folder, and then I go up another folder, and then I might want to go into links, and this may seem to work. Notice that I can go back and forth fine. But the problem is that once I upload this to a web server, this structure may break. because I've gone too far. So what you typically want to do is only go up as far as you need to. In this case, yes, this technically works, but we only really need to go up one level. And the reason I bring this up is because I see this a lot on assignments, is that people will submit something like this and it'll work on their computer, and then they send it to me and it's broken because their folder might be called something different. And it's very fragile. So only go up as far as you need to go. And in general, there's something called the web root. In this case, the root is links. So you never want to go outside of links. So by going up one more level, this is taking us outside of links. And now it's kind of uncertain because the folder outside of it may be called links. If it's on a web server, they may not have permissions to go outside of that. So we generally want to stay within, not generally, we always want to stay within what's called the web root. And we generally just don't want to go any further up than we need to. In this case, we only need to go up one level, and that's all we have to do. Okay. And finally, the easiest case, I usually actually go over this first. The easiest case is when you're trying to go to an external website. And we'll just grab the IRC page. And let's actually not just do the home page, let's do a registration page. So we'll say IRC registration. And I'm going to split this up into multiple lines, which we can do just to make it a little bit more readable. And here, this is if you're going off-site to an external site, you have to provide the complete what's called URL. So this is called the protocol. It's almost always going to be either HTTP or HTTPS. Probably 99.99% of the time it's going to be one of those two. And then the website name, so in this case www.irsc.edu. And then from there, that's the rest of the path information. So there's a folder called admissions, and then there's a file in there, register for class. By the way, notice, actually like the old website from a couple of years ago, it had really, let's just say I like the new website a little bit better. Notice the naming convention. Register for class. Now, personally, I might have just called it registration.html, but they still at least kept the dashes in between so that you don't end up with those %20s. The only time you need to use this is when you go to an external site. Now, I've seen people overuse these because if you've got a running website, you might just use this for all your links and it'll work, but it's very fragile. Because say, for example, many years ago, we weren't IRSC, we were IRCC, Indian River Community College. If you had all your links pointing to IRSC, and then the website name changes, all of a sudden all of your links are broken. And I've worked in various places where we had to go through and fix links like that, where the name of the website or, for different reasons, the links had to be fixed. It's not an easy process. We had to actually write a bunch of scripts to go through, okay? So even though this technically works and you might think it's better being more descriptive, you tend to want to use relative links as much as possible, because in this case, it doesn't care, with these two links, it doesn't care if it's off-site or not, or if the name of the school changes, because it doesn't have any information about the actual website name, okay? So I think that's, and let me just save all, let's just make sure everything works. IRC registration, great. And all of our other pages work. So now let's go to your assignment. Okay. So the assignment is essentially going to be based off of those examples that I just gave. So the first one is just to make sure that you can actually write some basic HTML. It's very simple. All you have to do is an H1 tag with my demo page and then an article. So basically like the first example. The next one is create an HTML page with your class schedule. If you only have 1 or 2 classes or a bunch of online classes, you can just make some stuff up. It's just try to get at least 4 or 5 items on there. And I'm very loose with how you can structure it. Some people might want to structure 1 class per row. Some people like to do each class as a column. Just as long as it makes reasonable sense, I'm okay with that. Next, let's make sure this actually still works, because I'm reusing this from a previous semester. Great, still works, okay. I've accidentally put dead links in here before, because I reused some of the links from previous semesters, but this is good. So what you're going to do is create a page with an unordered list, and that's going to be the ingredients based off of this link. And then the cooking directions are going to be an ordered list. And then so part 4, so 1 through 3 should be pretty straightforward. Part 4 is what throws people off. The basic structure is going to be the same, so you're going to have an index.html page. Rather than having a folder for family members, you're going to pretend that this is some sort of store or restaurant or whatever. You're going to have individual pages for products. So what I mean by, this throws people off sometimes, but what I mean by products / product 1, product 2 is that means that there's going to be 1 folder called products, and then there's going to be 2 pages within that 1 folder, product 1 and product 2. Where have we seen this before? Just like with family. But in our case, just to save time, I just created the 1 page. You're going to create 2 product pages. Now you can get more descriptive with the product pages if you want. To me, I don't really care too much. And then one more thing is that you're going to have an image. And you're going to make an images folder because, again, on your site you might have a bunch of images. You might want to group those together. So you can use any stock image that's like appropriate for your page. And then make sure all the naming conventions are good as well. Okay, so don't, everything lowercase. If for some reason you want to describe something a little bit more specifically instead of product 1, say for example you've got like a, if it's a restaurant, if you've got a food item, just make sure if it's like a multi-word food item, all lowercase, use dashes, just like we did in class here. Essentially, I'm just going to grade based off of the lecture. Okay. And if you're confused at all, go back to the examples that we did in class today, because I grade these using all the best practices that we talked about during the examples. So even though something might not be described specifically in here, like using the spaces, using dashes instead of spaces for the file names, I will be grading on things like that, okay? So pretty straightforward. I would say get that done as soon as possible. You have a little bit of time, but this is supposed to be like a review lecture. So yeah, just try not to spend too much time on that. Should be fairly short of an assignment. And then to submit that, what you do is, say for example, this is the assignment right here. All you have to do is, Mac has essentially the same thing. You right click and send to a compressed folder. I'm pretty sure they call it the same thing in Mac, compressed folder. It's actually what's called a zip file. And do that, and then what you turn in is this right here. Don't submit individual pages. Why? It's going to break the structure. So what's going to happen is that you're going to try to submit it, and you can't submit folders. All you can do is submit files, and so it's going to break your structure. So the only way to retain that structure is to do a zip file. If that doesn't make sense, just know that at the end of the assignment, let's say 9/1/2020, that's your whole assignment. It's got the individual pages, it's got the links, it's got everything. All you do is take that assignment, send it to a compressed folder, and submit, and that'd be the end of it. Okay. Any questions on that? If you do end up having any questions, just shoot me an email. I usually respond fairly quickly. If you haven't heard from me in about a day and a half, something like that, send me another email. I might have just gotten lost, okay? Okay, let's talk a little bit about CSS. I just want to get started on CSS because next class I just want to spend the whole time on CSS, and I just kind of want to make sure everyone still feels comfortable with it. So this would be example, let's say example 5. Let's say example 4 was our links. So let's go File, New. HTML shell. Doesn't really matter. We'll call it 4. It's a little weird going EX1, 2, 3, 5. So HTML has the structure of our page. It says this is an article, this is a header, but it doesn't say anything about how it should look. Now, as I mentioned previously, it does have some default styling. In practice, I actually like to use reset scripts, like a very popular one is reset CSS. And what those do is that they actually, that default styling, like the bullet points for our lists, it actually gets rid of those, and we just start from scratch from everything, which can kind of be kind of nice, especially if you're doing a large site, because you're going to be undoing the default and applying your own style so often that it can actually get a little bit messy to read. So those reset CSS scripts just give you a blank slate. Some more of a blank slate than others. So HTML is just supposed to be for the structure. CSS stands for cascading style sheets. The part we care about is the stylistic information. So let's say, for example, we had our announcement. So we'll just keep life simple. We won't do a header and all that. We can actually just do an H1. It says spring registration open. I'm actually going to be lazy and copy and paste. Let's do this, because I don't want to confuse anybody. Let's actually take our entire article from before, and let's just concentrate on that. So I'm going to copy that, and then paste it in here. Now, normally you'd put main and a header and all that, but I'm actually more concerned about the CSS than I am about the specific structure of this. So if we want to put inline style, so what that means is that all the stuff in here, so from here to here, it's going to be applied. So let's say, for example, in header, I would do style equals, and then let's say, for example, I want this to be, I don't know, blue. There's a CSS property called color, and I do colon, and then just regular blue is fine, I guess. What that does is with an internal style is from here to here, everything's going to be blue. I think I might have to reset this. Hold on. There we go. Okay. And so notice that the H1 and the paragraph are blue, but the subsequent paragraphs are not. Okay, so the way an internal style works is that whatever I do style equals from here to wherever the tag ends, that's where it's going to be applied. Now, if I wanted to apply something to the entire article, I could do that as well. So there's one called line height. And let's say we want to make the line height, I think I can use percentages for this. So let's say, that'd be kind of pointless to do that. Let's say 125%. So slightly larger line height than normal. I think that worked. Kind of looks like it did. That would apply to the entire article. Okay, so that's called an inline style. Next, we have what are called internal style sheets. And so the internal style works is that up here in the head section, I put a style tag, and then we use these things called selectors. We'll talk about selectors a little bit more next time, but let's just start off with, I want the paragraph selector. So what we do is a P, and then any CSS that we put between these curly braces is applied to all paragraphs. How many paragraphs do we have? Well, we have these two down here, but don't forget about this paragraph as well. And let's say for our paragraphs, we actually want the color to be some sort of grayish color. Dark gray, I guess, works. Probably not super readable, but for this it's fine. Now what do you notice about, so that says I want to make all paragraphs dark gray. Previously this paragraph was blue, but this rule overrode that, and so notice that this color is actually our dark gray. And that's the cascading part of cascading style sheets, okay? So what we did here is that we said, okay, I want everything within this header to be blue, but this rule ended up actually overriding that. Okay. And then there are two more, so that's an element selector. There are two more called ID selectors and class selectors. We'll get into that next time. There's not really time. So that's just to get started. We'll start from scratch next time, and we'll go through all these, but I just wanted to kind of remind you that CS existed. Okay, any questions? Everyone's good? So make sure to get your assignment done. If you have any questions, don't forget my email is listed in here under office hours, or you can, I think you can actually email me directly through Blackboard. Remember the due date. Make sure to zip it. Please, please, please. If you're at all confused about how to zip, shoot me an email. And then if there's no questions, I'll see everybody next week. Stay safe and just keep in contact if anything comes up.